My guest, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, joins me for the last hour, and we go through what happened around this time of year over the years. Derek, welcome back for the last hour.
Hi, it's great to be back again. That was, well, happy birthday, Jackie Wilson. He was born on the 9th of June, 1934, and that was one of his less well-known, minor hits, but I think one of the best things he ever recorded. He was known as Mr. Excitement. And I would love to have seen that guy on stage. An interesting thing around that time, Jimi Hendrix was playing in his touring band, because Jimi Hendrix did an awful lot of stuff before he came over to the UK and became famous. He played with Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, absolutely amazing. But I thought election night, it's all over now in terms of ability to influence it. But Screaming Lord Sutch, rock and roll's very own politician, monster raving loony party.
Can I ask you now, because it doesn't matter anymore, but did you ever vote for the monster raving loony party?
No, I must confess. I'm not sure I ever had the opportunity to.
But if you had would you have?
Probably not. I do take these things a little bit on the serious side.
I think when you kind of walk up to your polling station with this kind of I'll show them, I'm gonna vote for the kind of dodgy kipper party or whatever, and you get in there and you think, no, I've got to take this seriously, Dave. You're thinking,
well, it can affect the rest. Well, not necessarily the rest of your life,
but certainly
your tax bill for the next couple of years, and your mortgage rates.
Yeah, so I don't think I would have voted for him either.
But I mean, he started off with the Teenage Party. He famously changed the name. I think the first time he fought under it was when he opposed Harold Wilson. I can't remember. Oh dear. Feedback.
That's the old alarm going on.
Oh, good. Well, let's hope. When we see the smoke, we'll have to.
We're okay. We're okay for now. We'll brave it.
But he stood against the man who was then Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like Harold Wilson 16,000 or something,
So was that sort of 64? We stood
around there.
4, 5. Yeah.
And
gosh.
He polled, I think, about 800 or 600.
Yeah.
But he fought every year, and there are people. I mean, he died actually on this. Well, not on this particular day, on the 16th of June, 1999, by his own hand. And there are still people fighting the monster raving loony seats up and down the country. I dare say there'll be some on the TV this evening for anybody else who's going to be up all night with a bottle of wine watching the results.
I wonder if he ever regains his deposit. So I'm sure he must lose it every time.
He must have lost it every time.
He must, because you have to get. Is it a percentage?
It's a percentage. I forget what it is now.
Yeah, I'm sure he must.
It's certainly more than the votes that he ever likely to have had. But one of the reasons we managed to find something that he cropped up in, and on the 25th of June 1962, he was playing a gig in London, and a very young Keith Moon wandered backstage and had a chat with Carlo Little, Lord Sutch's drummer, and asked him for drum lessons. Now, Carlo Little actually stood in as the Stones drummer now and again, and in a parallel universe somewhere, you've probably got a version of the Rolling Stones with Carlo Little as the drummer. But I mean, lots of other great birthdays to share. If you're born in June, on the 3rd with the legendary beat poet Allen Ginsberg, and the 9th. 1915, Les Paul famously made the first solid body guitar known as the Log, but also lesser known that he was a pioneer of special effects as well for guitars, as well as being a recording artist. Dennis LeCorrier, the voice of Dr. Hook, he was born on the 13th, 1949, and as we speak he is over in Australia and New Zealand on tour, and he's coming over, I think, to the UK. He was in the UK last year.
He lives here now, doesn't he?
He lives in the UK now.
He does, yeah. Because he's been on this show. Not on this show, beg your pardon, he's been on this station.
Yeah. Oh, I've always been a big Dr. Hook.
He's a lovely guy. I met him.
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Really he actually said nice things about the book, RocknRoll Unravelled.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't he?
Exactly.
Who wouldn't say nice things about it?
In fact, on my website, www.rocknroll Unravelled, you can actually see what the quote is. Noddy Holder. He was also born in June on the 15th.
Now, he's never been on this show.
No,
which is a shame.
Should be, really.
Because if he was on this show, I'd have to turn your microphone down to about half, because his voice even dwarfs yours, doesn't it? Which is just amazing.
Absolutely incredible. I mean,
Did you
what
ever
a
see
life
Slade?
that is. No, I didn't.
I saw Slade.
Yeah.
Oh, what a band.
Yeah, they must have
in
been.
their original proper lineup. Oh,
Yeah.
what a band. Absolutely wonderful. I mean, they could just rock the roof off the house. They really could. None of this kind of pop nonsense. It was just heads down, we're going for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent band.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Georgie Fame, born on the 26th, 43, and Bob Brunning, not a name that rolls off the thought process very easily. He was actually the original bass player with Fleetwood Mac. Now, bearing in mind that Fleetwood Mac was named after Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, this is before John McVie joined the band. At the time, Mick Fleetwood had just left John Mayall, and John McVie wasn't altogether keen to leave the security of the very regular work that John Mayall brought. So for the first few months, Bob Brunning was the bass player in the band. Then John McVie obviously joined, and they became the legendary band that they were. And actually, on this day, June the 8th, in 1975. Talking Heads made their debut at CBGB's in New York. Now, CBGB's at that time, it's 1975, they were the absolute beating heart of New York New York punk and new wave, and loads of bands actually made their debut there. In 1959, the Clovers released Love Potion No. 9. Now, back in the Rolling Stones days in the first half of the 60s, when everybody was doing American R&B covers, that was one you could guarantee. If you went to a local dance, you would guarantee that somebody would play that. Now, there is an album version called Love Potion No. 10, which mulls over what might happen if you actually go on to the next version. So it's worth hunting that out as well. Vietnam War was starting to run down in a way, but this is 1969. I mean, it continued well into the 1970s, but the first 25 troops were withdrawn. Two people who were linked on this day, Brian Jones actually left didn't so much leave as was booted out of the Rolling Stones. It was generally thought he was becoming a little bit of a liability. I think one of the problems he had was he had a drugs bust, and he was having great difficulty getting a visa to go into America. So the Stones at this stage hadn't toured America for about 2 years, and he was much more down the blues route than the other guys were. And at the time, he approached Alexis Korner and said, "Can I join you in your band?" Because he was just about to go off to Germany on tour. And Alexis apparently said to him, "Well, it'd be very nice, but I think perhaps you ought to form your own band, as you did." Of course, it was Brian Jones that formed the Rolling Stones. He was the original Rolling Stones. That when there was a lineup, a Brian Jones lineup before Mick and Keith joined. But on this day in 1962, Alexis Korner was recording a session for an album called R&B from the Marquee.
Can I just interject there? I was actually in a pub probably about 4 years ago, and it was called the Wattenden Arms, which is in Kenley, in Surrey. And I was in there, I was having a nice drink and a meal sort of thing, and there was a bloke behind me, and he did have a guitar with him, and I was sort of earwigging his conversation. He was talking to another chap. Man talk kind of thing, and he swore blind that he used to be in the Rolling Stones.
Right.
And I have no idea who he was.
Yeah.
I couldn't see his face or anything like that. I didn't recognise any voice, but he said, "I used to be in the Rolling Stones."
Yeah, he might well have been, because
he could have been sort of 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Very much so, because there were a lot of before Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman joined as the rhythm section. They had a lot of drummers and bass guitarists who sort of drifted through the lineup. But if you hunt out an Alexis Korner album called Juvenile Delinquent, released in 1984, shortly after his death, there's a track on there called Get Off My Cloud, and I thought it'd be interesting to hear what it might have sounded like had Brian Jones and Alexis Corner got themselves together at that time.
How about that then? Alexis Corner and his version of Get Off of My Cloud. What do you think? Did you?
I really like that.
You do,
I love that album.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant album.
Yeah.
I really like it. I'm quite a big fan of people like Alexis.
I love his voice.
Alexis, God, amazing.
That track, Get Your Mojo working, it's just his voice. But I kind of didn't get the feeling of his voice in that. It just seemed a bit softer.
Yeah, it was there. But I just couldn't resist that, the close proximity of Brian Jones on this day to Alexis Corner. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunity to play Alexis Corner tracks.
No, I'm going to dig out the Get Your Mojo working or whatever
absolutely.
It's called. We'll play that in the next couple of weeks.
That's another one that, every time we went out, one of the bands would play that. There would a corner of about 30 songs that were very popular covers at the time.
Yeah, I'm just making a note, so I definitely will do it.
But Emily, June was an interesting time for Deep Purple. I mean, happy birthday, John Lord, born on the 9th in 1941, and Ian Pace, born on the 29th, 1948, the year I was born.
What a drummer.
Oh,
and what a keyboard player. The sound he used to get out of that.
Absolutely.
Was it a Hammond? I suppose it was. Fantastic.
Yeah. Now, early days, the 4th of June, 1969, Ian Gillan was playing in Episode 6, a band called Episode 6. And he was invited, Richie Blackmore and John Lord popped down to see him play. And he was invited to join the band, followed closely after by Roger Glover. And sort of shoot forward almost a year to the day, on the 3rd, 1970, they released the Colossal in Rock album with what generally considered, well, by lots of people, to be the classic lineup of Richie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian Gillan, Ian Pace and Roger Glover. But I think that is got to be one of my favourite Deep Purple albums. I really do like that.
I think my favourite's Made in Japan. I just
superb.
I just love that. The fact that it's live just adds an extra something, a warmth.
Yeah. A lot of people don't like live albums. I've always liked,
I love live albums,
unless it's rubbish.
Because they always say that the only thing live on a live album is probably the bass drum.
Yes.
The rest of it is
There's
just it's been tweaked.
Yeah,
to put it politely.
Yeah.
It's been tweaked, hasn't it? But who cares?
Exactly.
What comes out of those speakers is still massaging my ears.
Exactly.
And I'm still thinking this is wonderful.
Yeah. And the thing about live albums is you do get slightly more self-indulgent solos, guitar solos.
Oh yeah, they go for it, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And you get a few more flurries going across the various.
And once you've got used to the whatever it is they do as a solo, it becomes almost the norm. So when you listen then back to the studio version, you think, hang about, there's something missing here. I'm going back to the live one.
Exactly.
But I do prefer it. But of course, out there in listener land, if you don't prefer it, let us know. We'd love to hear your opinions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not everybody likes a live album.
No.
But there were some interesting things going on in the sort of back room of rock and roll in June. On the 25th of June, 1949... Billboard magazine, which has been going a very long time, actually changed the name of its race music chart to Rhythm and Blues. Before that, there was a lot of segregation before rock and roll, and it all sort of came together in the mid-50s. There were the black music from black artists and the music from white artists was only listened to by the sort of same people, as it were. You think as recently as 1949, now the R&B charts were actually race music charts.
And they actually labelled it as race music.
That's what they're called, race music.
Gosh,
race music.
It leaves a lump in the throat, doesn't it?
Yeah, they had by jukebox, hits by jukebox, hits by sales of platters. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Well, one of the great changes on the 3rd of June, Aristocrat Records became Chess Records, one of the great record labels of all time. And the first single was by a guy called Gene Ammons. And surprisingly enough, the A-side is called Bless You. which doesn't sound like the kind of title you tend to hear on chess too much. And what they did, it's not number 1 or 001 or 0001. The first chess record is number 1425, and that was after the family home on South Karlov Street in Chicago. But what's really good is the record that was 1426, the second release was Muddy Waters, Rolling Stone, and that is the song that Brian Jones thought, ooh, I like the sound of that. I might call the band that. And that was the second record ever released on Chess Records. And again, in the sort of back rooms, Chris Blackwell was born on the 22nd in 1937. And he's the founder of Island Records, which went on in the 60s to be one of the great, well, what would be thought of now as sort of an indie label with people like Jethro Tull, Fairport Convention. And they did some great samplers, which cost 14 and 6 at the time.
14 and 6.
Which is £0.75, more or less.
You were robbed.
So, and it started off in Jamaica in the late 50s, the label. And apparently he was inspired by Alex Waugh's Island in the Sun book title for the name. But, I mean, they did go on to do some magnificent stuff. Of course, there was the tie-in with Stiff Records as well, we talked about some months ago. And Mickey Most, another backroom chap. I mean, he started out as a singer in a boy band, well, a duo boy band, basically, the Most Brothers. And like the Righteous Brothers, you know, they weren't siblings. I can't remember the other guy's name offhand, but the other guy went on to be the manager and producer of the Moody Blues' first single, Go Now. So they both went on to quite good stuff. Because it was very much Mickey Most that turned Donovan's career into a real success story of the likes of Mellow Yellow. And he produced House of the Rising Sun, one of the greatest singles, I think, from that era. And in contrast, Jeff Beck's Truth album was a Mickey Most production. So, I mean, the guy was pretty out there, really. But I think one of my favourite Motown bands of all time is the Four Tops. And happy birthday Levi Stubbs, the lead singer. He was born on the 6th of June in 1936. And the four guys got together, I think it was mid-50s, I think it was 1954. What would he have been then?
What's that, sort of 70? No, 30, 50, 81.
Yeah.
He would have been 81 then?
Yeah.
Gosh.
And the four guys got together in high school. They call themselves the Four Ames, but changed the name because of the Ames brothers. And they recorded for about 4 different labels, one of them being Chess, funnily enough, before they were picked up by one of the Motown labels. It wasn't Motown itself, it was one called Jazz. And they've got a famous lost album that didn't surface till the end of the 20th century. But what brought it all to an end was Lawrence Payton's death on the 20th of June 1997. I mean, it's amazing to think, if you look at the Temptations, the bandmates at the label, they had loads of lead singers.
Yeah, chops and changes, didn't they?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
But he refused all offers of going into a solo career. And I think it was the better for it. Because it a bit like, I think, bands like the Stones, bands like the Beatles, you know, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. And I thought it would be great to hear what was their first hit record when Motown finally decided to give them a Dozie a Holland song, because for the year that they bid them with them before, after they were signed up and before they released this, they were singing backing vocals on other people's hit records, but then they were given this, Baby, I Need Your Loving, and wow, did it change.
The very unmistakable voice of Mr. Levi Stubbs and Baby, I Need Your Loving. Four Tops, of course.
Oh, absolute. One of my all-time favourite bands. And complete contrast, on the 29th of June 1968, the Pink Floyd released Sauce Full of Secrets. And this was really, Syd Barrett was moving out and Dave Gilmour was moving in, and they both feature on that particular album. And in fact, on the 5th of June 1975 was the last contact that Syd Barrett ever had with the band. When they were recording "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," spookily enough, he wandered into the studio and nobody recognised him. I mean, there is a famous photograph taken on that day, and it's easy to see why they didn't actually recognise him. And after that, he went into seclusion back in his hometown in Cambridge, which is rather sad. And also last, on the 17th of June 1981, it was the last concert that Roger Waters ever performed with the band, because they famously all fell out. And that was, of course, the Wall concert at Earl's Court. They did get together again in 2005 for the G8, but that was just 3 or 4 numbers. It wasn't a full concert. And some interesting footage around the time I saw of interviews with David Gilmour and Roger Waters. And when asked the question to Roger Waters, would you ever get back with the band? The answer was probably, basically. When Dave Gilmour was asked the same question, the answer was, well, not so much what he said, but what he didn't say and the way he said what he didn't say was never in a million years is that going to happen. But again, it's interesting that when Roger Waters, because he was this main songwriter, he was the driving influence, and you'd have thought when he moved on and the other three won the legal battle to use the name Pink Floyd again, you'd have thought that he'd have been the one who'd have had massive commercial success, but it was actually the other way around. But Roger Waters has just, I noticed, released a new album in the last week or so.
I've only heard one track. Well, it's not bad,
actually.
Heard any of it yet. One track, one single. It's quite good.
Yeah, because I really liked his last album, which I think was about 10 years ago.
Right.
Amused to Death. I like his solo stuff personally, but let's hope he carries on with some more good stuff. And the Beatles, I mean, wow, June was a very big time for them, as well as Happy Birthday Stuart Sutcliffe, born on the 23rd, 1940, and Paul McCartney, born on the 18th, 1942. They embarked on their final world tour on the 24th of June, 1966. Kicked off in Germany, played their last ever gig at Hamburg then. But the rest of the tour was, to say the least, disastrous. They went on to Japan. They played the Budokan, which is a martial arts shrine, and a lot of Japanese chaps took a very dim view of a rock and roll band playing there. Then they went on to the Philippines, and they managed to totally upset Mrs. Marcos, who invited them to her place for a cup of tea, and Brian Epstein politely declined, but she took this as an absolute personal insult, and apparently they needed a police escort to get out to the airport to get away. And then, of course, they went to America, and this was just after Dateline had published the we're now bigger than Jesus, more popular than Jesus comment from John Lennon. And that tour was met with Ku Klux Klan in car parks, picketing the gigs, DJs burning Beatles books and organising official burnings of Beatles records. And they spent their whole tour afraid that somebody might end up getting shot. And surprisingly enough, it was at the end of that tour that they decided that maybe with the complexity of how Revolver and Sgt Pepper are going to be, we don't really want to be a touring band anymore. Why don't we just become a studio band? Also in June 1966, on the 20th, in America, they released an album called Yesterday and Today. Before Pepper. Pepper was the first one that was basically the same on both sides of the Atlantic. But it was released with a butcher sleeve. Notorious. If you've never seen it, again, it's easy to find a copy of it. And what it is, it's the four mop tops dressed as butchers with white aprons, and they're festooned with decapitated dolls and chunks of meat around them. And the record shops took a dim view of this, and the album was withdrawn, and a new cover was provided, which showed them all leaning on a big suitcase, basically, 6 foot high trunk. That's the word I was looking for, travelling trunk. But what the record label didn't do, Capitol, they didn't actually destroy those labels. They just put the sleeves. They just stuck with glue the new label on the top of the old one. So some of the old butcher sleeves was still underneath. Now they are worth a small fortune now in good condition. But the Beatles have always been out there pushing some kind of frontier. And also John Lennon famously performed with Frank Zappa on the 6th of June 1971 at the Fillmore. Quite controversially, Lennon put the album out on sometime in New York as a sort of bonus album, but claimed the copyright and retitled some of Zappa's famous songs, like King Kong. There's a great quote I saw from Frank Zappa that said that Frank was not amused, and I thought that was a good thing to be happening. And of course, we could not let June go by without a mention of Pepper, even though we had an extensive mention earlier. Some of the things we didn't get to talk to earlier with the cover itself. John Lennon wanted Hitler, Jesus and Gandhi. Hitler actually got as far as being mocked up. I don't think Jesus got that far, because this is hot on the heels of We're More Popular Than. But the only reason Gandhi wasn't on the sleeve was EMI thought that it might affect sales in India. So they vetoed Gandhi. There was some talk of Elvis maybe, but Paul's quoted as saying, well, we didn't have Elvis on there because we felt he was too important to feature on the album. And like an American actor called Leo Gorcey wanted $500 to appear, so he was drawn in initially, and then he's sort of airbrushed out. So if you look at the sleeve and look at the back row, you'll see there are a couple of bits of sky, as it were, where people had been but didn't make the final cut. He was in Angels with Dirty Faces, one of the sort of gang leader in that. And I thought that it'd be interesting to hear another Pepper track. This one is the actual introduction to the album. And again, as we were saying earlier, the Paul is Dead myth, several of the songs do. After the Day in the Life on the original vinyl albums, it goes into some gobbledygook that goes on, well, forever, basically, if you just leave the stylus inside the groove. But one of the other clues for us people who like things like this is at the end of this, just before it goes into Ringo's song, the words say, "Let me introduce to you Billy Shears and Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band." And one of the thoughts of that Billy Shears is the replacement Paul McCartney, and I did read somewhere that the reason he was selected is he'd won a look-alike Paul McCartney competition. So, lots more clues.
And there it goes. That's the way it finishes.
Yeah.
Billy Shields.
Yeah, exactly. So, is that, or is that not? But we can ponder on that this time next year for the 51st anniversary of. Marvin Gaye was making a name for himself right back in the late 50s. On the 12th of June 59, he appeared in the Moonglows, which are a very popular doo-wop band at the time. It was led by a guy called Harvey Fuqua, and he recruited Marvin Gaye. And Marvin Gaye's name then was just spelled G-A-Y, and it was the E that was added after Fuqua actually moved to Berry Gordy and became one of the first executives at Motown and brought Marvin Gaye over, who probably became arguably the biggest star Stevie Wonder, one of the biggest stars that Motown ever produced. Some of the social things going on in June as well are pretty fascinating. The Watergate scandal broke on the 17th of June 1972, and that ended up bringing down President Nixon a couple of years later. What's interesting, he hired a team of guys he called the plumbers to fix the leaks that were coming out, and maybe there's some strong parallels here, which is why I thought that we'd pop this one in to the news today about the FBI and the nice Mr. Trump over the water, who's engaged in not so much engaged in, but in a very similar kind of situation. But sadly, on the 5th, 68, Robert Kennedy was assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. But Frank Zappa, there's a name that springs to mind whenever you think of really good music. And a couple of associate. Howard Kaylan from the Turtles was born on the 22nd in 47. He played with Zappa for a while. And Lowell George sadly died on the 29th in 79. He was with Zappa before he went on to form Little Feat, and apparently it was Zappa's drummer, Jimmy Carl Black, who thought of that name when he referred to the foot size of Lowell George. So it's interesting where band names come from sometimes. But on the 27th, in 1966, Zappa released, Mothers of Invention released the first album, Freak Out. And again, that's a time with Sgt Pepper, because that's one of the two albums that's obviously talked about as being an influence, along with the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. But on the 16th of June, 69, Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band released an album called Trout Mask Replica, which is generally considered to be one of the very influential albums of the late 60s. It was produced by Zappa on Zappa's Straight label, and this is a very short track from that called She's Too Much for My Mirror.
1 minute and 41 seconds. She's too much for my mirror, Captain Beefheart. Acquired taste, perhaps.
Absolutely. Not everybody's cup of tea, as they say.
Yeah, well, you know.
But interesting album. Check it out sometime. June was a great time for first albums. 1976, the Runaways debut. 1972, the Eagles debut. And as we said earlier, 1967 on the first, the David Bowie's debut album. But on the blues front, there were some great things going on. Robert Johnson had the second of his only two ever recording sessions, and that was on the 19th of June 1937 in Dallas, Texas. And on the 27th of June 1962, Muddy Waters recorded You Shook Me, which later featured in a bit of a scrap with Led Zeppelin. But it had an interesting background, this song. It started life as an instrumental called Blue Guitar from a guy called Earl Hooker. And legendary blues songwriter Willie Dixon put some words to that, and it became You Shook Me, and one of Muddy Waters' more famous songs. Sadly, on the 1st of June 1948, the original Sonny Boy Williamson died. He was only 34. He died in a street robbery in Chicago. But what's a little bizarre is that there was a guy called Rice Miller, also known as Alec Ford, who took his name and became known widely as Sonny Boy Williamson II. And both are very, very highly rated blues harmonica players. But one of the great birthdays today is the 10th of June 1910, Howlin' Wolf. Real name Chester Arthur Burnett, and that's the name you often see as the writing on the writing credits. Great guitarist, singer, harmonica player. And he too crossed swords with Led Zeppelin, because they took this next song and turned it and decided to name it the Lemon Song. But he got his just credit after a chat between the various sets of lawyers. Now, the song here is Killing Floor, and this is the one that Hendrix famously jammed with Cream. So if you've never heard the original version, this is Killing Floor.
If you're going to write a good song, write it just like that. Not bad, eh? Killing Floor, Howlin' Wolf, 1965.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant song. And also lots of great birthdays this month. 21st of June 1944, Ray Davies of the Kinks, Driving Lights songwriter with the Kinks, was born. Now on the 19th of June 1965, they started their ill-fated first American tour. Ill-fated because they didn't tour again until 1969. So if you bear in mind that 1965 was when the British invasion was going, and a lot of British bands were being very, very successful, the Kinks missed out on all of that. There seem to be various reasons you read about as to why they were blacked, essentially. They were banned by the unions. And one of the reports I read, which is probably quite possibly true, was that it was down to Ray Davies having a bit of a contretemps with one of the union guys at one of the gigs and give him a bit of a slap on the nose.
Oh dear!
Union Man took a dim view of this, and the Kinks didn't play in America until the end of the decade. But talking of beginnings, Jimmy Page joined the Yardbirds on the 21st, 1966. He actually joined as the bass guitarist. So for a while, he then moved to lead guitar, and for a while there was a dual lead guitar option with Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. Now, to see one of those gigs would be pretty awesome, I should think. There's very little recorded with the two of them, sadly. But Lynyrd Skynyrd, again, more firsts. On the 30th, 1971, they were in the middle of quite a marathon series of sessions at Muscle Shoals for what would have been their first album. But after hours and hours of recordings with lots of different musicians passing through the ranks, the record company decided that they wouldn't release it. And it didn't get released until after the band had their fateful plane crash, which killed a number of them, and it was released as Skynyrd's first and last. But also, in June, on the 24th, 1974, they released Sweet Home Alabama, after Freebird, probably their best-known song. And this was a bit of a rebuke to the nice Mr. Neil Young, who'd said not such nice things about Alabama in Southern Man and Alabama. So Skynyrd decided, we'll show you what a song about Alabama should sound like. And it was also a great time for Eric Clapton. Well, part of it was a great time. On the 7th, 1969, Blind Faith played their debut gig, and it turned out to be their only gig in the UK when they played at Hyde Park, and then they went off on an American tour and split up essentially in Hawaii at the end of that tour. So they were only together for a while. And what had happened was, I think that Blind Faith had very, very high expectations. Cream had just folded, and Blind Faith was very much promoted as a real supergroup. I don't think Eric Clapton was ever completely comfortable with that. So for his next band, which, funnily enough, on the 14th, 1970, Derek and the Dominoes, they had their first performance, and that's when he started to take more of a back seat in the band. And what he did there, he recruited a bunch of people from Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, who'd supported them on their American tour. Small Faces, now they crop up in an interesting way. Both on the 2nd of June 1967, they'd left their original label, Decca, and they'd moved to Andrew Loog Oldham's immediate label. And Decca decided that what they'd do is they'd put out an album on exactly the same day that their new a single on the immediate label came out, and the Small Faces were recommending to their fans not to buy the album. Now, this is what the single sound like, and this is Here Comes the Nice.
Not a fan of fading records, but time has beaten us, I'm afraid, Derek. And we got about 30 seconds before the 11 o'clock news. It's been fantastic, as usual. You're going to be back in about a month's time. Yeah. We haven't decided what we're going to do yet, have we?
No, but there's loads of good things.
I'm sure something will turn up.
We'll have some good topic. And don't forget the website, www.rocknrollunravelled.com.
Don't forget it, indeed. I will see you in a month's time, Derek.
That's brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Dave.
Cheers, mate.